Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a good weekend. We've had a lot of rain here. It's very unseasonal, in fact. I did an interview with an old friend of mine called Peter Ndoro, who's now with SABC, on Friday afternoon, after the Supreme Court decision about the implications of the decision and how I saw things playing out in the next 60 days. Do take a listen if you've got some time. And it was also a great pleasure to catch up with CNBC's Bonnie Tunya, talking about Kenya, Africa, the NSC and all that. And that hopefully will be published by them in the next hour or two, and I'll put up a link for that as well. Home thoughts, back to Hunter S. Thompson. Anything that gets your blood racing is probably worth doing. I like this photograph from the sands at Nomad. This is of the Diani sandbank, and it's so beautiful down there on the south coast. Here's another beautiful photograph that Nick Mutoti alerted me to. This is by K Researcher, Mount Kenya from Lower House. We've been to Lower many times, the most beautiful place to visit. I like this Arizona desert house. Went to Arizona many years ago, I must admit, and had a wonderful time. Burning Man Festival horror as man dodges firefighters and dives into flames, which is not really the idea, I don't think. Political reflections. This is Guernica by Picasso. And I won't describe what it's meant to describe. I'll leave it for you to have a think. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Sobering comparison of North Korea nuclear tests. The first in 2006, the fifth in 2016, and the sixth on Sunday. It's a good way to compare the sizes of these blasts. They claim a successful hydrogen bomb test. And you remember my piece in 2010, far away in distant lands lies the Hermit kingdom. They all have had tiny little hands, like the elves and the shoemaker. This land is ruled by the House of Kim, and its capital is Pyongyang. The first and eternal president was Kim Il-sung, and his successor Kim Jong-il, whose designated successor is Kim Jong-un. They've all had tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. And this country has nuclear weapons, I wrote in 2010, and on its border with its neighbor, South Korea, sit 25,000 American soldiers, whom I think the North Koreans would like to run right into the sea. Seismic data is seen here comparing the 5th and 6th North Korea nuclear tests. This one was obviously much more powerful. That was from Carl Bildt. Here's a photograph of the Ivy King detonation, the United States Department of Energy. Carl Bildt again says, I guess Donald Trump is now preparing to launch a tweet. It will lift off in smoke and fire, then with a roar disappear into nowhere. And then there was a dramatic move in dollar-yen, which obviously always reflexively trades stronger when there's some geopolitical news of this sort. And Lee Sachs asks, can you spot the North Korea missile prep news? A Survation poll, and bear in mind, Survation called the general election completely accurately. A Survation poll for the Mail on Sunday put Labour on 43%, a 5-point lead over the Tories, who are on 38%. New satellite imagery shows near total destruction of Rohingya Muslim village, 700 buildings burned, part of a pattern, Kenneth Roth. And then Tirana Hassan, at least there's one Nobel laureate calling for the protection of the Rohingya. Pity it's not the one who holds office in Myanmar. And obviously that was referring to Malala, and if you're interested in her statement on the Rohingya crisis, I will upload it here. And in this photograph you see Rohingya refugees fleeing attacks in Myanmar, pouring into Bangladesh. The line is miles long. It's a real tragedy and a stain on our moral conscience. And it's funny how we pick and choose who we want to deal with. And in this case, clearly we don't want to deal with this military government, and the Nobel Prize winner should be giving it back. US to challenge China with more patrols in disputed waters. This is in the Wall Street Journal. The Pentagon for the first time has set a schedule of naval patrols in the South China Sea in an attempt to create a more consistent posture to counter China's maritime claims there, injecting a new complication into increasingly uneasy relations between the two powers. The US Pacific Command has developed a plan to conduct a so-called freedom of navigation operations 2 or 3 times over the next few months, according to several US officials, reinforcing the US challenge to what it sees as excessive Chinese maritime claims in the disputed South China Sea. Beijing claims sovereignty over all the South China Sea islands and their adjacent waters. And I wrote about this at the end of last month when I said, apart from a few half-hearted and timid FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations, China has established control over the South China Sea. President Xi Jinping and other leaders are seen in this photograph, other leaders of BRICS countries posing for a family photo. I like this photograph that Holger tweeted of Angela Merkel, and also she is clearly a sure bet. Holger again showing the differential. This photograph from the Ministry of Defense Russia caught my attention. Sunset over the battlefield of Tank 2017. Let's move on to international markets. S&P futures dropped on Korea tensions, and Holger asked, will markets ignore this like last Tuesday when early sell-off was erased after North Korea launched a missile? Good question. Currency markets, euro dollar 119.18, dollar index 92.85, Japanese yen 109.50, Swiss franc 0.9648, the pound 129.45, the Australian dollar is at 0.7958, Indian rupee 63.825, South Korean won 1121.81, Brazilian real 314.04, Egyptian pound 17.646, and South African rand 12.9417. Dollar index put up a 3-month chart, but it still needs to regain that level of 93.50 to get us excited. But certainly it does not look as down and out as it was looking a couple of weeks ago. Dollar yen 109.50 trading last. This is an interesting chart from Eros Santoni. He's looking at it from a chart basis and expecting the yen to strengthen. Having seen what I think was a very big intervention when the dollar yen got to about 108.26, I think the Bank of Japan is looking to push dollar yen higher. So I'm inclined to believe it's going higher. Euro dollar 119.18. Draghi's up this week, and he's surely going to try and talk it down. Whether he'll be successful or not, I'm not so sure. Commodity markets, gold, let's take a look at that, 1335, we've broken through 1325, which was resistance, we look set for 1350. And then look at this, the rally in the commodities markets has been led by the industrial metals index. And take a look at this chart from Gianclaudio Torlizzi. All metals rose Friday after the LME index of 6 contracts capped an 8-week advance last Friday, one short of a record run in 2006. Nickel advanced as much as 2.9% to its highest since June 2015. Crude oil, this is interesting now. Take a look at this chart from Triple Leverage. He sees this sort of area where we are right now as strong resistance. Of course, if we break through it, we could see a run up to about $50 on WTI, in my opinion. India gets its first defense head in years amid border woes. I like this photograph from Quartz. Once upon a time, a corner of India was home to the most mesmerizing dawns. Venezuelan dollar bonds are testing new lows as President Maduro plots how to respond to new US sanctions and revive an economy which is in a shambles. The country's $4 billion in benchmark notes due in 2027 declined 4.6% in August to 39.65 on the dollar, just 7 cents away from the record low of 32.45 cents on the dollar seen in February 2016. State oil company PDVSA's $3 billion of notes due in 2035 declined 5.8% in August to 35.3 on the dollar, only 6.2 cents above the record low. Anti-government protests that left more than 100 dead this year faded after Maduro moved to cement his rule by rewriting the constitution. He is expected to announce measures on Friday to bolster the economy, but if history is any guide, it will likely be too little too late. Speaking about this for eternity. DRC Kinshasa opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi is seen in this photograph addressing some supporters at his house. Police escorted him home from the airport. Subsequently, they fired tear gas to disperse supporters on Sunday. It's clearly a fragile situation, and the economy is absolutely cratering, but the president seems unhappy or unwilling to move on. Both countries have bounced off the bottom, but the sustainability is in question. I was speaking about Nigeria and South Africa. I said Nigeria needs a single FX policy, and South Africa needs more policy certainty. But I said both countries have bounced off the bottom. Xi met with Zuma, vowing to deepen cooperation with South Africa in an all-round way and firmly support peace and development in Africa at the BRICS meeting. South African oil shares just off a record high. It's up 11.57% this year. Dollar versus rand, 12.94 when I looked last. And as I've already outlined before, I'm inclined to think that Zuma's on the way out, and therefore one's got to start nibbling at the rand. Egyptian pound at 17.646. Nigerian oil share up 32.11% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 41.44% year to date. Cash-strapped EAC raids reserve fund to pay salaries after member states delayed remitting their share of the budget. Will have to borrow $3.38 million from its general reserve fund to pay salaries and suppliers after member states delayed remitting their share of the budget. Not a good sign. Daniel Ashby says Acacia suspends underground work at a huge mine, warning of significant reduction in thousands of Tanzanian jobs as government ore export ban bites. I spoke about that previously. Now, let's get to Kenya, where we've seen a great deal happen. Obviously, on Friday, Kenya's top court gives democracy a second chance. That's Bloomberg View headline. With its decision to nullify the results of last month's presidential election, Kenya's top court has invalidated the votes of some 15 million citizens. It has also struck a blow for democracy that will reverberate across Africa. Now comes the hard part, holding new elections within 60 days that are untainted by the irregularities, intimidation and violence that have scarred past contests. The court's unprecedented decision, the first time the re-election of an incumbent president has been reversed anywhere on the continent, came in response to challenger Odinga's complaint that President Kenyatta's re-election victory was abetted by vote rigging. The court found irregularities and illegalities in the transmission of results. The court has yet to release its full written judgment. I think they've got to do that with some dispatch now. Yet what matters is the process is working. One candidate filed a complaint, the court issued a decision, and the other candidate agreed to abide by it. The judiciary has affirmed its independence and moved to defend the integrity of Kenya's electoral process, bolstering the confidence of both investors and voters. These developments also mark a deeper entrenchment of democracy in Africa, as demonstrated by the strength of opposition parties in Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. The danger is that the run-up to new elections in Kenya's highly polarized environment and the inevitable disappointment of the losing side will trigger violence. To give clear guidance to Kenya's Electoral Commission, the court needs to release its full ruling as soon as possible. A credible election demands a commission that commands greater public confidence. A working and secure electronic voting tallying system should not be beyond the reach of a country known for its digital innovations. New election will be closely fought, but the court's intervention should strengthen the public's faith in Kenya's judiciary and, by extension, its political process. That's a victory for all sides. New York Times, Kenya's giant step for fair elections, the Supreme Court's courageous decision to nullify the re-election of President Kenyatta is a critical first for Kenya and Africa, demonstrating that democratic institutions are capable of acting independently and resolving disputes that in the past have often spilled over into violence. This was interesting. The ruling was also a rebuke to international monitors and diplomats, and to this page who were too quick to dismiss charges of irregularities, largely out of relief that the August 8th voting had been mainly peaceful, in the hope that disappointment with the results would not lead to the sort of violence that erupted after the disputed 2007 election, in which hundreds of people were killed. The court did not implicate President Kenyatta, who had been declared victor by a comfortable 54% of the vote. Mr. Kenyatta, whilst arguing that the judges had acted against the will of the people, declared he would respect the ruling. The Kenyan Supreme Court has done a major service to democracy and the rule of law, and has provided a much-needed lesson to international observers. My piece over the weekend is Court Ruling Impacts Economy. Friday was a day of unprecedented and high drama. The Supreme Court of Kenya's 4-2 decision to annul the election was an unprecedented move in Africa, and the first time on the continent that a court ruled against the electoral victory of an incumbent. The Chief Justice, David Maraga, declared Kenyatta's victory invalid, null, and void. This is only the fourth occasion worldwide when this has happened. Ukraine, Maldives, and Austria refer. The judges ordered a new vote to be held within 60 days. Given the damning nature of the verdict with respect to the IEBC, the court ruled that it had failed, neglected, or refused to conduct the presidential election in a manner consistent with the dictates of the Constitution. It's unclear to me how the 60-day deadline is met. I would recommend that we look at the marble solution a la Gambia. The court's decision was unprecedented because in such cases courts have weighed the level of malfeasance and infraction in the balance. And typically where the margin of victory is so wide, courts have taken the view that the level of infraction does not rise to a threshold which would have altered the result. Here the Supreme Court ruled on a literal and narrow constitutional basis. The president's lawyers were outplayed and slow to appreciate the ground had shifted. Interestingly, the immediate media response to the decision spoke of a coming of age of Kenya's institutions, and Renaissance Capital's Charlie Robertson tweeted, "Elections are costly in Kenya and disruptive to the economy, but there are hard to quantify benefits from independent judiciary and rule of law. Markets hate uncertainty is a refrain that reverberates through the markets, and on Friday we saw a big outsized bearish reaction. The stock exchange's circuit breakers kicked in and the stock exchange was halted for 30 minutes when shares had fallen by 10%. Subsequently, trading resumed and the Nairobi All-Share closed minus 3.69%. It's plus 22.18% so far this year. And the NSE 20 closed minus 3.47%. That index is plus 22% year to date. I am afraid we're going to see further selling pressure this week. The shilling, which was at a 4-month high before the ruling, closed minus 0.4%, and our average yield over treasuries blew out 25 basis points on the EMBI Global Diversified Index to 411 basis points. Kenya's $2 billion sovereign bond, maturing in 2024, fell 1.33 cents according to TradeWeb data, the lowest since mid-August. The historic Supreme Court ruling pours uncertainty on the Kenyan economy, said Emma Gordon, an analyst at Verisk Maplecroft. Investors will be concerned about the financial implications and the high risk of violence, she said. With the possibility of the new election going to a second round and the result being contested again, political uncertainty could easily last the rest of the year. Today we're throwing songs, not stones, said opposition supporters to John Aglenby. We need all to make sure we keep it that way. Q1 GDP expanded at the slowest pace since 2014. And clearly another 60 days of electioneering is hardly going to be a growth ignition. The two principles need to deconflict their language because otherwise there will be more blood in the water. Clear evidence shows that the Commission was taken over by criminals who ran the general elections using the technology system and inserted a computer-generated leadership, said Raila Odinga. President Kenyatta said, we shall revisit this thing, we clearly have a problem. The COTU, Secretary General Francis Atwoli, asked President Kenyatta to sober up while addressing his supporters. Here, NASA is seen hitting the campaign trail in Nairobi immediately after that. I think this was on Saturday or Sunday. Here we have a photograph of William Ruto, the crowd in Kiambu County. So just to mention, Kenya is the fourth where we've seen such a decision. Ukraine, Maldives and Austria are the others. The IEBC, according to a report from James Lokwale, was in a day-long crisis meeting following the Supreme Court edict. For the record, the IEBC tweeted, we have not had any scuffles or crisis meetings as reported, all is well, save for the fake news. Put up a photograph of Raila Amolo Odinga, another chart of the yield on Kenya's $2 billion worth of Eurobonds due 2024, which soared 19 basis points, the most since July 6th. I said to John Aglenby of the FT, the economy was already on the ropes. This is a punch in the solar plexus. We're going to have another 60 days of God knows what, I said. Kenyan growth jitters rekindled as court orders election rerun. There was a lot of exuberance that the elections were over. A fellow from Genghis Capital, inquiries had shot up from private equity firms, from foreign investors who were holding off on investments. A lot of investors will hold off again just to see how this plays out. This writes off the second half as things slow down. Prospect of further political upheaval has spooked the financial markets, with the FTSE NSE 25 index slumping 4% on Friday, most of the year. Bond yields, as we've already said. Kenya's economy has been one of the continent's star performers, expanding at an average of 5.7% a year since Kenyatta took office in 2013. The growth rate eased to 3-year low of 44.7% in the first quarter as drought curbed agricultural production. Last month's vote spawned new challenges as fears of a repetition of ethnic violence that claimed more than 1,100 lives after a disputed 2007 election curbed consumer and business spending and scared off tourists. Shops, restaurants, hotels emptied for about a week around the election, and the normally congested streets were mostly empty. While the results announcement did spark protests, violence was mainly confined to opposition strongholds in Nairobi's slums in the western city of Kisumu. The opposition said more than 100 people were killed when the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights put the death toll at 24. In the few days before the election, business was very good because customers were stocking up. This is Chandarana. But saying now it's totally slowed down. Right now business is back to normal, but as far as for the coming election, I don't know what is going to happen. We have to get through a difficult period of uncertainty until the second election is concluded. If this process can be completed with contained address in 60 days, then 2018 still looks rosy. I can't see major economic decisions being undertaken and cannot see credit growth picking up. This is John Gumi, chairman of Kenya Pipeline. Other than rain-fed agriculture, the sectors one should be anxious about are tourism, construction and retail. Banking is another, where reduced economic activity, especially the impact of this on small business, is a real worry. Gunmen killed 2 police officers guarding a church on Kenya's south coast on Sunday. That's not a good sign. I interviewed with Alan Kasuja in a van outside the Sarova Stanley early this morning at between 5 and 6. I'll put up a photograph or two. Nairobi All Share, even after the fall on Friday, is still up 22.18% year to date. NSE 20, it fell 3.47% on Friday, but that's still up 22% year to date. Nairobi Business Ventures reported full year earnings. Revenue slumped 45%. They reported a loss before tax of 32.84 million versus a profit of 6.3 million last time. They haven't told me what the EPS is, and then interestingly there's the following comment about whether they're a going concern. In considering the going concern basis used for preparing the financial statements, the directors have considered the financial position and the performance of the company, the latest period presented, as well as its prospects for a period of not less than 12 months from the date of issue of the information memorandum. For the year ended to 31st March 2017, the company generated a loss of 32.8 million, used cash of 26 million in operations, and a net current asset position of 68 million. My question is it a going concern? That's not clear to me. Once again, thank you for stopping by.